Many Christians dream of stepping foot in the places where Jesus walked and taught, of seeing the land of the Bible come to life before their eyes. For centuries, Christians have taken pilgrimages to the Holy Land, the historic land of Palestine, to see the stories of their faith take shape in stone structures and lush desert valleys. The Christian tradition shares this region as a religious birthplace with Judaism, and with Islam as a place of divine revelation. And yet, Christians have maintained a unique relationship with the land of the Bible and its holy sites since the 4th century CE. Trips to the Holy Land are ubiquitous for maze-filled walks through the vibrant old city of Jerusalem, boat rides on the Sea of Galilee, followed by a meal of St. Peter's fish, reading passages of scripture from hilltops and olive groves, and visiting the holy city of Jesus' birth, from Shepherd's Field to Manger. Yet, between the lines of this Bible-colored view, there are the stark realities of those who live in the land, those whose stories often remain unheard by tour groups and religious pilgrims. Tourism in the Holy Land stops short of telling the whole story of the land, from biblical times to today. And the question begs, what lies in between, or perhaps right under our noses? What happens when Holy Land tours go beyond checkpoints and separation walls and leave no living stone unturned?
This is episode 6 of the Touring the Holy Land series with Across the Divide podcast. Jen here as your host. In this episode, I have a conversation with my friend and imaginative Christian peace builder, Jer Swigart. Jer talks about his own transformational journey in traveling to Palestine, Israel as a seminary student. And he talks about his process of realization that immersive relationship-focused experiences are a key element to Christian peace building and to transformation. He talks about the work that he does with Global Immersion of taking Christian leaders to Palestine, Israel, as well as Northern Ireland and the Deep South, to really have transformative experiences where they're learning from their kin, in the case of Palestine, Israel, from Israeli and Palestinian kin, in order to build a relationship and understand their place in realizing peace and justice, both in Palestine, Israel, and in their own contexts. Jer is a storyteller through and through, so this episode is it's so much fun to listen to because he takes us on a journey, really, weaving stories throughout and inviting us into his own transformational experiences, his experiences of conviction, one where he's had to have a lot of humility and learn from mistakes, and invites us into considering some of these big questions about tourism, Palestine, Israel, and peace building with him. Jer Swigart is the co-founder of Global Immersion. He seeks to learn, love, and lead in ways that disarm violence, bridge difference, and awaken imaginations to restorative possibilities. He focuses on leadership formation, particularly with leaders and teams who have become disillusioned by the incongruence between the values of Western Christianity and those of Jesus. In addition to his participation in local and national justice and reconciliation commissions, Jer is a North American contributing member of the Reconcilers Together Alliance, a Pepperdine Cross-Sector Leadership Fellow, and a Senior Fellow of the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute. He holds an MDiv from Fuller Theological Seminary and his Doctor of Leadership in Global Perspectives from Portland Seminary. As the author of Mending the Divides, Creative Love in a Conflicted World, a speaker, facilitator, and consultant, he often reflects on the intersection of faith, leadership, and conflict transformation. One more thing I'll say before I let you have this amazing conversation is, as you're listening, and Jer shares more about the transformative and brave and Christ-centered and prophetic work that Global Immersion is doing, I would invite you to think about folks in your life, perhaps you yourselves, who are in positions of leadership, who might feel drawn into that sort of transformative work that they're doing with their Christian cohort leadership groups. So think about what you might feel drawn to or perhaps called to as you listen, or if there are folks in your life who might need an invitation into this work in this time as well. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Jer Swigart. Jer, welcome to Across the Divide. It is truly such a joy and an honor to have you here.
Oh, I'm an avid listener, so I've just been waiting for the opportunity to be on it with you. So this is great. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah. I'm really excited for our conversation. Things that I've learned from you over the years, and so I'm excited to invite our listeners into some of that and some of the pretty poetic ways that you speak about your journey of transformation in the work that you do. So maybe to start off, Jer, can you just share a little bit about your own story and what your first experience was like traveling to Israel-Palestine? Maybe what surprised you during that time, or challenged or transformed you on that trip? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean, a little of my own story. Grew up between a dairy farm and a military base in Midwest Wisconsin, and with an understanding of God who is loving and probably a bit militant, and is willing to endorse the use of violence to accomplish godly means, and had a pretty clear understanding, in the religion that I inherited around who was in and who was out and who we were trying to reach, and with a special emphasis on people who looked like me, and probably the Jewish community as well. And it wasn't for me until after 9/11 that some of the constructions of theological constructions, I think constructions of enemy and other and neighbor, began to disintegrate. And I found myself in a place where I was responding to an earthquake in northern Pakistan, and found myself flying to the top of the Himalayas, being dropped off in the middle of a village, and being offered the warmest hospitality by a Muslim community that I have ever experienced in my life. And got to serve as a communication liaison between the Pakistani military, United Nations, and the tribal villages of northern Pakistan in response to an earthquake. And it was in relationship there that I started to ask some really big questions about a God who might have a more a wider reach of his restorative wingspan than I maybe had imagined, and started moving from constructed enemy to friend to family with my Muslim kin in that space. So I had an immersive, I guess in some ways, a massive part of my life story was deeply immersive, not connected to like a program or a trip, but just in response to a moment. And now, 20 plus years later, my life's work is shaping and guiding immersive formation opportunities, because I think it stands among few as having the potential to open the pores of our souls. And get us to a place where we start to ask questions about who we must become for the moment that is and is coming. First time I traveled to Israel-Palestine was 2011, and I had the privilege of traveling with Dr. Glenn Stassen, David Gushee, and Mark Gopin, connected to my last course at Fuller. And because of who I was traveling with, we had access to some spaces off the beaten trails of tourism. And so this wasn't quite a Holy Land tour in kind of like a Christian tourism way. It was very much so an educational experience, but it took us into places and rooms where we had access to folk who were in the trenches of this particular crisis. And Jen, I remember asking, like, at that point, I was a relatively well-traveled, globally formed leader. I'm pretty voraciously curious. I read a lot of things, and I was stunned the first time I was there, 2011. I was 31 years old. I was stunned by what I didn't know. And and so I remember even asking, we would by day, we would have these radical encounters on both sides of the wall, both in Israel proper and the Palestinian territories. And by evening, I would sit down with my friend John and Dr. David Gushee, who's one of like the most profound Christian ethicists, and we'd be like, what in the world just happened?
Yeah.
And how did we not know? How did we not see this before? And here's the moment, though, that really undid me in that particular immersion into Israel-Palestine. It was an evening when we had a free evening, and the itinerary was done, and I somehow got word that there was a 14th century Muslim cemetery being bulldozed, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm kind of that person that I'm like, if I hear about something, I'm going to try to get as close to that as I can to understand what in the world does this mean. Of course, I'm also moved by what I'm learning in relationship with Israelis and Palestinians about this crisis and the way that land and establishing infrastructure, or the role of erasure from the land, that was a part of our learning experience. So I'm like, man, I didn't know enough to know anything, but I'm like, gosh, it feels strange to me that an ancient Muslim cemetery would be being bulldozed. Is this erasure? What is this? So I got close to it. And when I got there, there in fact were bulldozers literally plowing through a graveyard, guarded by 18-year-old kids with fatigues and guns, with Muslim families wailing, weeping, sobbing, crying out for anybody to stop this. And that did something to me, that changed me in a way where I'm like, oh, the kind of transformation that I need in my own life requires me getting close to things like this. And then seeking a deeper understanding of what's going on here. If we're going to be a part of change in the world, whether it's in our own cities or globally, we're not going to read our way into that revolution. We're going to probably live our way into it. And so I want to be a part of, both in my practice, immersing myself into areas of pain to understand it more deeply. But then I also want to be a part of immersing other people into stories that are uncommon or unseen. Because once you see, you can't unsee. And I think immersion does that uniquely. So that was kind of my first experience.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that. There's so much just to unpack in that story and so many places we could go. But I'm curious about a couple of things that you said. You're here as a student with Fuller Seminary, an evangelical Christian seminary, fairly progressive. And so I'm curious if that you went off the beaten path, like the way that your trip was organized is not the typical trip that most Christian institutions take students on when they tour. And so I'm curious if, like at the time, was that something that Fuller was sort of rocking the boat on? Were there other folks in the community that were surprised by that? And then the other piece that struck me is you saying that however seasoned and brilliant your professors and mentors are that were there with you, they were continuing to be surprised by and even shocked by and attempting to make sense of what it is that they saw when you were going back and forth through checkpoints. I imagine Jerusalem, Bethlehem, right? Like moving through the systems and structures of occupation that Palestinians move through daily. And yet using all of the robust theological tools and expertise that you had and still grappling with that. Did part of that feel a little bit surprising?
Yeah. I mean, there wasn't, nobody was talking about immersive formation in 2011. I think there was experiential learning. This, as far as I understand, was the first of its kind for Fuller. And I was a student then, so I don't know the kinds of conversations that happened to enable a really dynamic partnership between Doctors Stanton, Glenn Stassen, Gushee, and Gopin. Gopin was at George Mason and was at negotiating tables as a Jewish figure, a Jewish leader. So I think there's something beautiful about the collaboration that that caused that trip to even be a possibility. Being that it was the first of its kind, we got into rooms in the Palestinian territories and in Israel with people who were in the rooms during really significant moments of time. And so we got access to people. But I'm a voraciously curious person. So like I would meet people and get their contact information. And then, a couple of us would by night take a bus and get back into the space and share a table with these people. And I'm not bound by any itinerary. So I want to build relationships with these people and learn what I don't learn. Right. So we built some more robust immersions into that particular immersion experience. I think in hindsight, there were moments for our professors, our guides for that journey where they were as undone as we were by some of what we were experiencing. And there were moments of very visceral and raw processing that happened among all of us, which I think made it unique, because they weren't there to show us and then teach us. They were there themselves to experience this in a unique way, which added a dimension of humility to their own curation or guidance of the experience. In hindsight, I think there were some parts of that particular trip, being the first of its kind, that were irresponsible. For example, when we were in Hebron, we walked Shahada Street, which is where the Israeli settlement exists, but we didn't walk the souk. And if you know anything about a visit to Hebron, if Westerners are there and they're walking Shahada, everybody down in the souk below knows that. And folk in the souk are the Palestinian shopkeepers. Their livelihoods are contingent upon the very, very, very small number of Western tourists that actually make it down to the souk. So there's some anticipation that if this is a solidarity experience, that we'll be making our way down into the shop to spend some dollars there as well, but we didn't. And so the messaging based on the ethic of that moment is that we were on the side of the very extreme settlers. And we made that declaration simply by not visiting both sides of that particular location. And so I didn't realize that real time because I had never been there. I didn't even know that there was a souk below the Shahada. I, of course, was undone by so many of the realities of the particular that settlement. But it wasn't until hindsight and when we began to design some of our own immersive work in Israel-Palestine that I realized how irresponsible that was. Not purposefully irresponsible, I don't think. Probably more circumstantial. But if we're going to do immersion well, it just helped me understand we have to be very, very robust in how we think about this. And a couple of folk from the United States are not going to be able to build this responsibly. We're going to have to do this in relationship. And so it kind of took that learning out of a moment that felt a bit irresponsible.
This episode is supported by Peace Catalyst International. Across the Divide has joined forces with Peace Catalyst International to amplify the pursuit of peace and to explore the vital intersection of Christian faith and social justice in Palestine, Israel. Both Peace Catalyst and Across the Divide are committed to equipping Christians worldwide to move beyond apathy and into active solidarity, working together for a holistic and just peace for everyone in the land. By supporting this partnership, you can help elevate Palestinian voices and initiatives working for peace all over the world. Visit Peace Catalyst International's website to learn more about their work and consider giving to them directly or supporting us through our page on the Peace Catalyst website. The link is available in the show notes below. Together, we can equip Christians to begin following Jesus in his sacred and healing work for a just peace.
I appreciate you sharing that moment too of talking about the humility that's necessary for facilitators and those who are students or kind of learning from facilitators, that this sort of collective humility of the group creates a different environment for learning and immersion. But and just for our listeners too, the context of Hebron, has its own classification within the West Bank. There are areas A, B, and C, which sort of denote different sort of levels of military sort of surveillance and who has jurisdiction over areas, though those are not always followed. But Hebron has its own particular coding. There's H1 and H2, and there is an Israeli settlement that exists on top of the historic Palestinian city of Hebron. And so, Jared, when you're talking about Shahada Street, it's a street that has since been covered over top with nets because of all that these very extreme settlers began to throw down upon and use as a method of attack against the Palestinians who live on this open air sort of market street. And so, yes, your presence is visible if you are on the sort of other side of that street, if you were in the settlement. And then I'm just thinking about, kind of what you just said about immersion and the kind of learning that happens through immersion and relationship building. And then what is absent when there are folks that you don't meet with.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So this was one of those moments as well where I was with somebody who has since become a dear friend and a trusted colleague in this work. He was the one that alerted me to the fact that the settlement had actually shut down the thoroughfare, like the market in Hebron, the Palestinian market, and that market replaced itself, although right below the settlement. And he was the one that's like, they had to put up fencing because there are stones and bricks and urine and feces that are dumped on Palestinians and foreigners who are in that space. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I didn't have a category for that in my imagination. And so that was one of those experiences where I'm like, I can't not see that. If that's true. And if we got to see the settlement side of it, I can't not see the Hebron side. So that was one of those places where I returned to just with one other to simply walk. And I still have pictures of, the life and the vitality and the welcome and the hospitality of that souk. But then the cage above that's put there, not by the settlers, but by the Palestinians. Mm-hmm. And then all of the stones and the boulders and the bricks that if they actually landed on a human being would kill them. They're lethal, So again, it's what are we willing to do to immerse off the roads of comfort and the well-beaten trails of tourism and into reality to see more accurately. I think it takes courage to do that kind of immersive work.
Yeah, absolutely. And courage to witness too, like, because you have put yourself in positions again and again where you can be witness, attempt to build relationships so that you can befriend. I hear that in your story about visiting the 14th century, Muslim cemetery that's being bulldozed, of returning to Hebron to be a sort of witness and then figure out, okay, now that I have been witness, what is the responsibility of that witness? How does it transform me? But then how do I take it forward?
That's right. Well, and I think as well, Jen, it's recognizing, you take the Muslim seminary story, it's, am I able to see, and this is what immersion cultivates questions like these. Am I able to see the humanity, dignity, and belovedness in those with the guns and the bulldozers, as well as those who are wailing? Am I able to see the dignity, the humanity, the belovedness in those in a very extreme settlement, as well as those who are trying to eke out an existence underneath fencing that they've put up to save their own lives? You don't, that question is not demanded unless you find yourself immersed into realities that are very unsettling. And so there lies, I think, the transformational opportunity. I haven't just seen something I haven't seen before. When I see, it cultivates questions, deeper level questions that I have to grapple with. And in grappling, I think that's where we find our transformation.
Yeah. Okay. This is so good. So you've used the word immersion now, and we're talking about immersion in conversation. And I'm wondering if we can talk about now how this experience of traveling and so many others that, some of which you've named already, have shaped how you understand peace building work through immersion. You eventually went on to found and now co-lead Global Immersion, a nonprofit peace building organization that takes Christian leaders to Palestine and Israel and elsewhere in the world to shape them as leaders through experiences of immersion. How did these experiences shape how you, along with others, envisioned what this work needed to be?
Yeah, I mean, harkening back to the end of that trip with Fuller in 2011, we were up in the Galilee, and we had just had an experience that was life changing, and that clearly took us to places where Christian tours don't normally go. I think we knew that there was something unique about this. And I remember we were in Tiberias, and we had stopped off to grab like a falafel sandwich for lunch, which I've yet to experience its equal. So delicious. And I'm sitting there, and this big coach bus pulls up, and this group of boisterous Oklahoman evangelicals pile out of this bus. And, they've got their American flag, Israeli flag pins on, and they've got their tour shirts, and, are clearly thrilled. And, which good. I love that. And I guess I'm just kind of I'm a voraciously curious, but I'm also a tenacious friend maker. And so like, I am undone by the last 11 days of my life. Undone. I haven't laughed in 11 days. And I'm watching these people roll out of this bus like they are on a Carnival cruise. And it created so much dissonance for me. And so I happened to be standing next to this young woman from Oklahoma. And we were chatting about our experiences, and I'm being a little shrouded about my experience, learning about her experience. And they've been to all of the places that Christian tours take folk. And I'm like, yeah, did you spend any time in the West Bank? And yeah, we went to the Church of Nativity, which is in Bethlehem, which you actually have to cross through a checkpoint, but it's pretty well disguised if you're not aware of what's going on. You don't really know what's happening. And then they drop you off the Church of the Nativity, you take the tour, then you leave. And she's like, had you been in the West Bank? And I'm like, yeah, we went to some places, and she goes, oh, isn't it amazing how these two people live at such peace with one another? And that was the moment for me where I was like, the way that we travel here matters. Because we had both invested dollars and time and energy to come to a place, to experience it as fully as we possibly could, and are leaving with completely different conclusions about the state of the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. In her view, it's amazing. Money well spent, policy well crafted to create a reality where these people live at such peace. She had seen none of the structural violence or none of the realities of a militarized occupation. Where I had seen those things, and it had shaped a very different conclusion for me. And that's when I recognized, if we're gonna form peacemakers, and if we're gonna do it by exposing them to some of the finest peacemakers on the planet, which, by the way, are people who are embedded in trenches within war zones around the world, we're gonna have to. Again, we're not going to read people into it. We actually have to go where no one else is willing to go. And so that's I think one of the earliest convictions that led to the formation of Global Immersion. Global Immersion we never set out to be a peacemaking training organization. As a matter of fact, my colleague John Huckins and I, dear friends, were both pastors. Him in San Diego, me in San Francisco, and we wanted to create an immersive experience to accelerate the formation of our own people into peacemakers. And we didn't just close our eyes and choose Israel-Palestine. We chose Israel-Palestine because of the experience we had just had together as a part of Fuller. but also because of our growing understanding of how intimately intertwined American Christians are with that particular catastrophe. We could have gone to any conflict to learn from peacemakers. That one stands alone in just how intimately involved we are as a country and as a tradition, in that space. And so we began with an experiment. We're like, what if I grab 10 people from my community, he grabbed 10 people from his community, and we co-created an itinerary with some of our new Israeli and Palestinian friends, and they were crazy and generous enough to be like, yeah, we'll do this with you, and we did a thing, and it was a 12-day experience, and it was during the early days of social media. And John and I think, happened to have been compelling enough communicators and storytellers at that time that by the time we got done with this experience, two things had happened. We watched awakening and unmaking transformation in the lives of our people unlike we had ever seen in our young careers as pastors up until that point. And then the second thing is that there was a whole bunch of people who turns out were observing it, through social media, and were standing in line and saying, hey, the next time you do that, let us know, because we'd like to come too, and we'd like it to impact our congregations. And so that was really how global immersion went from a thing between two buddies to grow the capacity of our own people for peace and reconciliation to what now, nearly 15 years later, is a peacemaking training organization that does immersive formation with leaders across the country and throughout North America. So again, what I would say is what we believe about immersion is that it stands among few as the kinds of experiences that open the pores of the human soul and get us to the place where we're asking the question, who must I become? Which I think is chronologically a more important question than what do we do? What I mean by that is, I think we are socialized in this country and specifically within American Christianity to notice, diagnose, solve, and walk away congratulating ourselves for our good work. So there's a propensity toward doing. I'm exposed to a thing and I'm like, clearly we can solve this, and clearly we can do this quickly. And, people enter into our immersive work with that kind of socialization, upbringing, impulse, inertia. And the way that we immerse people helps them understand, oh, I need to fundamentally become a substantively different kind of person whose ethic is reparative, whose imagination is restorative. And I think an immersion well done gets people to the precipice of their next level transformation. And so we're really sober about what an immersion experience into Israel, Palestine, or others can do and what it doesn't do. And we can talk about this more in a second, because I think the most important piece to this Christian tourism or immersive work in Israel, Palestine in particular, is what happens after the immersion. I think we need to be really thoughtful and collaborative, deeply collaborative in the way that we design and facilitate an immersive experience in Israel, Palestine, or anywhere else. But if we abandon people at the precipice of that next level transformation, where they're there asking the question, who must I become? Because we've got another group of people to take on the immersion. I think it's irresponsible. I don't think we're going to see the kind of social transformation that is critical, especially in this particular catastrophe.
Wow. Okay. So, well, first, it's not surprising to me that your storytelling galvanized a whole horde of folks who then were ready to travel with you. Something that strikes me about this sort of model that you and John realized and imagined, sort of breeds that imagination into global immersion, is that it resists this sort of transactional economy, even of something good like repair or healing or justice, but that the Western Church is particularly good at and leans on, right? That we can identify a problem that we can figure out a sort of right answer or right response to it, and then have sort of deliverables or measurables that show how we have made that difference in our community or with the folks who have walked through our church doors. But this sort of transformation through immersion. It's a continual process that doesn't end when that immersion stops, is one that strikes me as quite similar to something that this teacher in Nazareth was once doing, of inviting folks into spending time with one another in transformational and not always desirable situations, and with folks who they would be much more inclined to call other or enemy than they would friend. And many folks were ready to overthrow the Roman occupation of Judea, or had all kinds of other ideas about how to actualize this sort of reign of the Messiah, and everything that he did resisted that and called an attention to a very different kind of embodied transformation. So I just wanted to lift that up because it was something that was striking me as you were talking. It's the much more difficult sort of way in that kind of work.
I think so, and I also, I'm a strong believer that the method is as important as the message. And what we want to see, like immerse, is one of the 4 practices of everyday peacemaking: see, immerse, contend, restore. So we're not just choosing a pedagogy because we think it's a better way to travel. The pedagogy itself is designed to build the craft and character of peacemakers who immerse as a way of life, right? So when you're immersing responsibly in Israel and Palestine, the folk that you're going to meet with are going to say, "Hey, we're glad that you're here, and we need you to be here because you're intimately involved in this crisis." But what are you doing to tend to the issues of structural violence and systemic injustice in your own place? Are you immersing like you are here into the lives and the stories of your indigenous kin and your refugee and migrant kin and your Black kin and like your LGBTQIA kin? Like are you doing this in your own place? And if not, why not? Right. So immersion is not just a strategy or an ethically responsible way to travel. It is in and of itself the way that we form people who live immersively, incarnationally, if we want to use a Jesus-y term, incarnationally as a way. There's no way that we're about the work of repair in this world if we do not know how to immerse with courage and compassion and curiosity into the life of another. So yeah, I think it is a modeled after a Jesus worth following,
Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate you just sort of lifting up those questions that Palestinians and Israelis would be ready to ask you, both like, okay, we are glad you're here, but also why are you here? And do you show up in similar ways at home? I think those are, I want to get into those questions in just a little bit, but with your story about this tour bus of Oklahomans that you encountered in the Galilee, I feel like you got at a little bit of what you have identified as some of the sickness or some of the harms of the ways that most Christians, and in particular most American Christians, travel to Israel Palestine. What are some of those particular harms that you've identified, and what are some of the most important ways that global immersion tries to resist some of those harms?
Yeah, good question. I've come to equate Christian tourism as equivalent to the birthright tourism within the Jewish community. There is a desire to tell a particular story that reinforces the hierarchy of people and the ownership of a particular piece of real estate, and to ensure a flourishing future for one particular people group, not two. I think it's the same with regard to Christian tourism. I mean, when you've got, I don't remember how many years ago, but Netanyahu, he made a comment about how he's abandoning trying to win the affection of American Jews because all he really needs is the affection of American evangelicals. Right. So he understood that the future that he wants, which is a future, to be very clear, a future completely void of Palestinians. The future that he wants is more contingent upon American evangelical support than American Jewish support. And so Christian tourism over there is a well-crafted, in my view, propaganda machine under the guise of let's learn how to read our Bibles better. It's a well-guided propaganda machine that is designed for American evangelicals to conclude what that young woman concluded. That this as it is, isn't it wonderful? So, you know, and that, how have we been trying to address that? First and foremost, this stuff doesn't happen outside of deep and meaningful relationship. And so, I mean, I even look at with tenacious evaluation on some of our own beginnings, and I'm like, man, that was so irresponsible. The audacity of two kids from the West Coast thinking they can make phone calls to folk over on the other side and be like, hey, we want to build a trip and bring, like, what in the world were we thinking? And I think it has a lot less to do with us and a lot more to do with the generosity of our Israeli and Palestinian kin over there, who saw maybe some potential in John and I, and believed enough in our own transformation and that they could be a part of it, that this was a way that they could do it. Honestly, you know, so this is deeply, deeply relational work. And, you know, I recognize that in most Christian tourism, there is very little, if any, analysis in terms of the historical arc of this catastrophe. Certainly not any involvement of U.S. American politics or slanted theology in this. It's actually it's beneficial to shield people from the reality of the catastrophe that is our religion and is the unholy fusion of this slanted theology with partisan politics that has very clearly accelerated the genocide of current genocide of a people. You know, so like so how do you combat that? You involve your Israeli and Palestinian kin in the preparation of the immersion. They co-create how we prepare people to enter into the space. Our commitment is that they're going to meet our Israeli and Palestinian kin as a part of our learning journey before we're actually on the ground. Our goal is to, from a historical, political, and theological standpoint, get to a place where people are standing on a foundation that is uncommon for American Christians, where when they immerse with us, they're no longer asking Googleable questions, because we want them to ask questions about formation and imagination and sustainability. And how in the world are you able to continuously transcend structural violence to be in relationship with people who they don't want you to be in relationship with? Because if you're in relationship with one another, maybe you begin to imagine what mutual flourishing looks like in ways that actually begin to crumble the structural violence that dignifies some while denigrate others. You know, so we want our people. Yeah, we want our people prepared to ask those kinds of questions and to meet those kinds of people. And so, you know, as this is all relational work. And so as I think we became more trustworthy over there, because I think if we did something right, we did it in relationship. And we responded when our Israeli and Palestinian kin felt like we were doing something irresponsibly, unethically, wrong, hurtful. You know, they loved us enough to tell us that. And I think we were humble enough to be like, okay, we trust you, you know, and over time together, we continue to hone how we do this, you know, to the point at which it's, if you immerse with us it's not, we're not raising up Israel-Palestine activists. We're raising up robust reconcilers, everyday peacemakers who know how to live, love, and lead in their own place that fixes broken things, but also in ways that ripple positively and restoratively to Israel and Palestine, because we have a responsibility there too.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious, like, how it is that, I don't know, just you kind of talking about the very clear systems and structures that are in place to keep the average Christian shielded from the violent realities of occupation, of apartheid, and now even genocide that continues to unfold in Gaza. And the irony that you just kind of pointed out is that we're being shielded from our own tradition of the history of American Christian and particularly Zionist political and American political kind of support of the state of Israel in really big ways, and in ways that have done great violence to Palestinians. How do you grapple with the reality of that beast, that this is still the norm, while doing this transformational work on a small scale, but seeing that ripple into communities? Like, I guess this is really a question about hope, or a question about endurance. But how do you grapple with that beast and continue to do this work that I imagine, continues to come under increasing threat, just with the sort of shifting political environment in the U.S. and in Israel, and their sort of increased policing of who it is that travels into their borders and spends time there?
Yeah.
How do you navigate all of that?
I mean, I'll share a quick story. So I was in the West Bank on October 7th, a couple of years ago, when all this broke open, and spent the next almost full week working with some of my people who had actually arrived. I was gonna guide an immersion experience so a training, some of my people entered into what they thought was going to be a training space, but turned out they entered into an active war zone, and which was a wild couple of days to be a pastor and a psychologist and a travel guide, and but also try to figure out how do I connect my people with my people over there, and in the midst of this, learn and form and grow the fabric of friendship between us, because we're clearly going to need this. And I'm evacuated, fly into Boston, and I'm walking through customs, and the sun is rising over Boston, and I have that crazy fusion of relief and shame. Right? Relief that I was able to get out, because as literally we were taking off, the sky is full with missiles colliding with rockets over Tel Aviv. But shame that I was able to leave. And so many of my friends can't, right? So I'm making my way. Oh, it's charming. The sun is rising over Boston. I'm living in this fusion. I get to customs. The customs officer is wildly curious that I've been in Israel. 1,000 questions. Last question being, what's the nature of your work? And I can't make eye contact with him, but I say peacemaking. And he slides my passport back to me with the oddest look on his face, and he goes, "Then why did you leave?" And that was my welcome back into my country. And I've spent the last, year and a half answering that question. I left because my work is not over there. My work is right here. And my work is to contend for the soul of American Christians who continue to pledge their allegiance to a religion that dominates. And our work through immersion is to guide them on a journey from a religion that dominates to a faith that restores. And what grows my hope, yes, we're combating this. These are powers and principalities. I mean, we're beyond the era of rational persuasion, in my view. Like, I'm not going to convince an American evangelical based on my stories and perspectives that they should think differently about Palestinians. It's not going to happen. We don't live there anymore. I think immersion is the only thing that actually begins to change people's minds, because it's there that relationships start to form, right? But I'm like, I am less convinced that the way forward is to try to reach the masses, because the remnant revolutionaries that we're raising up are far more potent than busloads of Oklahoman evangelicals. So what's growing my hope is a refined strategy for social transformation in the lives of transforming people who are finding a faith that's worth their lives, that looks like a Jesus that wears crosses rather than wields them, and their growing impact, their contagious way of life, love, and leadership in cities across the country. So like if I'm going to try to figure out how to combat or take on or whatever, like I'm done trying to convince anybody of anything. Right now, the work that we're doing is we're building the craft and the character of remnant revolutionaries, the reconcilers, who are figuring out that the way forward will be wildly costly, and that perhaps is the Philippians 2 way of Jesus, which again is deeply immersive, right? So that's what's growing my hope, and that's my answer to the customs officer, right? Like that's what the work looks like.
Yeah. Yeah, gosh, thank you for sharing that story. That's the second time that you've shared that with me, and I still had chills just all over my body, because like those are the kinds of questions, right, that haunt us. Of like, okay, now I need to seriously grapple with, my sort of privilege and positionality, and work out what this mysterious and troubled and alluring and really difficult work of peacemaking actually is, and what it looks like for you, right? As an American, as someone who grew up between a dairy farm and a military base, right? Like, and you own that. And as always, I feel, just talking to you, I feel reinvigorated that, like, yes, of course, a radically transformative relational experience, and someone who's willing to live this other and sort of costly way that values human life and flourishing over anything else. Of course, that's going to be 10,000 times more powerful than an apathetic story that we've been taught to believe and never quite live into. Yeah. So you just shared this story. What happened when you were in Palestine, in the West Bank, on October 7th, and the last year and a half, like, that Christian tours are not really happening. Like, travel to the region is not what's on the top of everyone's mind, and is not sort of the work that most of our communities are jumping to do right now. And there's also a question of safety and whether that is the sort of right work to do right now. And so what does this work of radical immersion and peacemaking look like right now? And when immersion in Palestine and Israel is not happening?
Yeah.
What's the call there, or what's the work there?
Right. I mean, I think that, for me personally, it's as regular as possible connection with my Israeli and Palestinian kin, because they need as much support and belief right now as we can possibly send their way. I just got news this week that a dear friend of mine who lives in Bethany and leads a school that is one of its kind in Palestine. It does trauma-informed education for youth with an emphasis on music, art, and sport. And unbelievable, like the ways in which they're literally pulling kids off the streets who have been socialized by occupation, doing trauma-informed education so that their life is marked by reconciliation rather than revenge. We need Milad and Manar and House of Hope in Bethany right now so desperately, right? And I just got word that his tour was canceled because it's not safe for Palestinians to travel to our country. And that's demoralizing to him. It's embarrassing to me, So they need belief and support. So I'm immersed relationally. For those of us who maybe don't have the opportunity to immerse in relationship, I think that this particular podcast is a resource, it is an immersive resource. And if we let it be, I think too often we look at resources like these as consumables. But if you've been listening in on this conversation as it's been unfolding since October 7th, this is as virtual and immersive experience as I think there is. And so I think this is a space where this happens. I think finding ourselves in places where our Palestinian kin are able to get into our country and where they are giving voice to what's happening. I'm thinking at the Christ at the Crossroads conference coming up in September. Get there with a heart, with an immersive heart, And I would say this, and this is where global immersion is really focused right now. Immersing into Israel-Palestine is exotic. When things are a little calmer, really exotic, really important. Not all of us are going to be able to do it, but if you can, come with us. It will change your life. But I'm hearkening the invitations of our Israeli and Palestinian kin around what does it look like to immerse in our own cities. It's far more exotic and sexy and desirable to go to the Holy Land on an immersion, and maybe far less obvious that the immersions that we need to be going on are into proximity with people who have been marginalized by the abuse of power in our own communities. And so part of what we're doing is helping organizations and universities stand up immersive experiences in their own cities that are doing two things. One, positioning people in proximity with folk who have been marginalized, and to do so with responsible relational intention. I want to see brokered relationships happen here. I don't need the organization or the university to be the sole owner of these relationships. When you immerse locally, do so with relational intention. Move towards solidarity with those. But I also want to see people, as they immerse in their own communities, immersing into relationships of accountability with power brokers. Because many of us who have the opportunity or the means to immerse are actually more proximate to the power brokers than those who are in pain. And if we're going to take seriously the work of peace and reconciliation, we need to be in both costly solidarity, as Muthersak would say, and relationships of accountability with the power brokers, so that when we're bringing perspective to the power brokers, it's deeply informed by our relationships of costly solidarity. So in standing up local immersions, global immersion is helping all of us have more access to this format of transformation that hopefully can be another tool in cities' belts around the country for the transformation of their cities and the healing of broken things in their places. So I don't think we need to just be thinking about Israel and Palestine. They are the ones saying to us, it's better for all of us if you are doing this work with those who are in pain in your own place.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. It's such an important word, and to just kind of expose these intersections, that these are not two different things of what's happening in our own communities, and what's happening with our kin abroad. Jer, I feel like you have invited us into a sort of prophetic imagination. You've invited us into the work of imagination, of imagining what costly solidarity and immersion through relationship in Palestine, Israel, and beyond looks like. So thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for the work that you do. For our listeners, stick around because we'll have a little bit of an extended conversation with Jer that's available on Patreon for our Patreon supporters. But for now, thank you for being with us, Jer.
If you think the work we're doing here at Across the Divide is important and the conversations we're having are necessary, then I invite you to consider becoming a patron of the podcast, a monthly supporter of Across the Divide on patreon.com/Across the Divide. You can support us for as little as $5 a month. and get access to various kinds of premium content like extended episode conversations, merch options, and the ability to have conversations with us and other Patreon supporters. You could also join us in frequent private meetings where we discuss previous episodes and plan for future conversations together on the podcast. So join the small and beautiful community of Across the Divide by signing up on patreon.com/Across the Divide.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Across the Divide. We are so grateful for your support and interest. The hosts of this podcast are Daniel Bannoura, Jennifer Madrand, and myself, Abir Shhali. Salim Anfous is our producer. Our theme music is composed by Charlie Rishmawi. To help sustain the work of this podcast, please consider becoming a financial supporter of Across the Divide. Any donation amount makes a difference, and with a donation of as little as $5 a month, you will gain access to exclusive supporter-only content. Go to patreon.com/acrossthedivide to learn more and donate. For any feedback or suggestions, connect with us on Instagram at Across the Divide Podcast. Until next time, stay curious, stay passionate, stay engaged, and join us again on Across the Divide.